Hey, this is Mr. Spencer. I'm going over the final two chapters of Into the Wild. Chris Mccandless's journey comes to an end. All right, check out this overview aerial shot of the bus down there. You see it? All right, so we're going to examine his values, which basically means what he cared about the most. And that's what English class is about. That's what literature is about, the study of humanity, human nature, and analyzing not just fictional characters' values, but real people and how we interact with each other and how we interact with the world around us. Okay? So, for Chris Mccandless, let's review the earlier chapters, chapter 1, 11, and 12. Chris was relatively an unknown hiker, not famous, until author John Krakauer wrote an article about him in 1993, right after his death. Now, Wikipedia calls him a hiker, but you could also describe Chris Mccandless as a homeless person, a super tramp, a vagabond, a folk hero, a college graduate. Call him what you will, but he's quite an enigma. Chris was born in California, but he moved to Virginia at age 8 with his family. He grew up in the 1970s in an upper middle class family. All right, upper middle class, well-to-do, affluent neighborhood. That means they lived comfortably with money. He was a free thinker, and he enjoyed getting lost on long suicide treks with his high school cross-country team. He had several close friends in high school and college in chapter 11 that's described, but he always had an intensity that made it hard for others to get close to him. All right, from chapter 11, we learn that Chris's father, Walt, worked for NASA. Walt separated from his first wife, Marcia. Keep that in mind. And he later married Billy, see in the picture there. That's Chris's mother. Okay, Walt and Billy had 2 children, Chris, and then later Chris's younger sister, Corrine. As Walt's career became more successful, Chris was embarrassed by things his parents spent money on, like vacations, boats, expensive restaurants. He often complained to his sister, Corrine, about his parents' values. After graduating high school, Chris discovered his father had been carrying on a secret affair with his first wife, Marcia, and had a child with her. That was after he had already had Chris when he was with Billy. So his father was two-timing Chris's mom. Chris was shattered by this, thought his father was a disloyal betrayer. And Corrine later wrote a book, memoir, describing the verbal, physical, and alleged sexual abuse her parents inflicted upon each other and their children, often fueled by Walt's alcoholism. Okay, now Walt and Billy, they denied this, but Corrine wrote her own book describing this experience. Corrine says it was her and her brother's abusive childhood was one of the motivating factors in Chris's desire to disappear into the wilderness after he fulfilled their wishes to get a college degree. All right, now the last part of chapter 12 showed how after graduating from Emory University in Georgia of 1990, he dropped out of sight and drove out west to live off the land. Okay, we learned from the chapter 1 in the author's note that Chris donated $25,000, all of his savings that he had kept working through college, to a charity for famine or hunger called Oxfam. Chris abandoned his car, burned all the cash in his wallet, and he hitchhiked up to Alaska. Can I get a ride, bro? He abandoned his car, hitchhiked, rebranded himself Alexander Supertramp in order to separate himself from the life and name his parents gave him and carve out a new identity for himself. Okay, chapter 1 that we read showed how Jim Gallion was a pickup truck driver who gave Chris a ride as a hitchhiker. It was early 1992, the last year of Chris's life, and he offered Chris, right before he walked off into the wild, a pair of his old rubber work boots. Okay, Gallion was an electrician, and he was also the last person to see Chris alive. How long did Chris's solo adventure into the Alaskan wilderness last? 4 months. Okay, he went out there in April when there was still snow on the ground, and he died in August of 1992. So let's talk a little bit about Chris Mccandless and a summary of the upcoming chapters. Okay, you're supposed to read chapter 16 and 18 this week. In April of 92, chapter 16 starts out, 4 months before his death, Chris pauses in his Odyssey journey to visit the Liard River hot springs at the threshold of the Yukon Territory. But after taking time to soak in the steaming waters, he can't find another ride. He spends 2 days at the Liard River before making friends with Gaylord Stuckey, a truck driver who reluctantly gives Alex, his nickname, a ride. They converse for a few days that the drive takes, discussing McCandless's family, his father's adultery, and his own desire to live off the land. Okay, again, this is all in the chapter 16 handout. Okay, that's the handout that has the mountains on the front, and it has Chris's journal on the back. Okay, it was April 25 in this chapter 16 that Stuckey buys a bag of rice for Mccandless. Then he drives him up to the University of Alaska in Fairbanks, where Mccandless wants to look up books on edible plants at the library there at the university. Knowing the local seasons better than Mccandless, Stuckey points out that, Alex, you're too early. There's still 2 foot or 3 feet of snow on the ground. There's nothing growing yet. But Mccandless ignores this advice. He agrees to send Stuckey a letter when he returns from Alaska, but shrugs off Stuckey's suggestion that he call his parents to let him know where he is. Okay, look how much fat Chris has on his face there. He's still got quite a little body fat on him. Next part of chapter 16. Mccandless spends 2 days and 3 nights around Fairbanks, mostly at the university. He finds a field guide to the area's edible plants, writes postcards to Wayne Westerberg and Jan Burris, some guys he stayed with while hitchhiking for a while, and he buys a used gun, a semi-automatic 22 caliber Remington rifle. He's located in the classified section of the newspaper. He leaves the university campus and he pitches his tent on frozen ground not far from the road that'll take him to the Stampede Trail up into Alaska. On April 28th, 1992, Mccandless hitches the ride with Jim Gallion in the pickup truck that will bring him there. That was all from chapter 1. Tramping through the bush, Mccandless soon discovers the abandoned bus along the Shoshana River, and he celebrates the discovery by writing in his journal on day 4, Magic Bus Day. At first, he has some difficulty killing small game. After about a month, though, Mccandless is routinely shooting and eating squirrels, porcupines, and spruce grouses. He devours local lingonberries and rose hips and climbs a nearby hill. On June 9th, 1992, Mccandless kills a moose, hundreds of pounds of meat, and he's so proud of this feat that he takes a photo of the carcass. He spends days trying to cure its meat so he can consume every part of the moose, but time is his enemy. Last part of chapter 16. After killing the moose and trying to cook and eat it as quickly as possible, Chris actually preserves the meat incorrectly, with the result that it becomes infested with maggots, and therefore it's inedible. Mccandless must leave the moose carcass for the wolves, which leaves him feeling deeply guilty. He wasted all this meat from an animal he shot. A waste? Mccandless lists the preparations necessary for leaving the bus, bringing his final and greatest adventure to a close. He's made some fatal errors, however. Halfway back to the road, he discovers a 3-acre lake in his way. When he first crossed the same area in April, the series of beaver ponds leading up to the Teklanika River had been frozen over, and they were easy enough to traverse and walk. Now, though, in July, these same beaver ponds have melted. The ice melted, the water levels rise. And moreover, the river itself, knee-deep for Chris at the winter's end, has now become a raging torrent, and Mccandless is a weak swimmer. He returns to the bus, chastened, weakened, and sort of discouraged, and he writes in his journal, "Disaster! Reined in! River look impossible, lonely, scared." He was ready to head on back, but he can't. He does not know, however, John Krakauer writes, because he refused to obtain a map of the area, that the river is passable only a mile upstream. If he only walked north 1 more mile, he could have easily crossed. It's ironic, tragically. Okay, chapter 17, the author, he kind of goes over some other people that got lost in the wild that aren't Chris. And then chapter 18, we go back to Chris's story. Okay, July 8th, 1992, Mccandless returns to the bus. He resumes hunting small game and gathering edible berries and wild potatoes, but he's burning more calories than he consumes. Skinny, skinny, skinny. He reads Leo Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and he finishes Boris Pasternak's book, Dr. Zhivago, writing, "Happiness only real when shared," in the margins of the book. A striking sentiment from someone so relentlessly compelled towards solitude. He wants to share his happiness with somebody, but he's alone. On July 30th, Mccandless makes an ominous entry in his journal. He writes, extremely weak, fault of potato seed, much trouble just to stand up, starving, great jeopardy. Krakauer, the author, points out that until this journal entry, nothing suggests that Mccandless is in danger of starving to death. Though hungry, he is otherwise in good health. Less than 1 month later, he will be dead. How? Wayne Westerberg, the man that had the grain harvesting business that Chris spent some time working for in South Dakota, he suggests that Mccandless ate some potato seeds that he bought in South Dakota. Potato seeds can become toxic once they've sprouted, but he would have needed to eat many pounds of these seeds, and he doesn't seem to have done so. So that's just a theory. There is, however, a wild potato that Mccandless may have foraged for and confused with a similar looking and toxic wild sweet pea. They look very similar. Maybe Chris confused it. The author's only speculating. Okay, second part of the summary of chapter 18. The author Krakauer, he imagines a hungry Mccandless mistaking one plant for the other and becoming incapacitated, already worn down by a subsistence diet, naked, afraid. His body wasn't able to stave off the emetic effects of the plant, which ultimately killed him, Krakauer suggests. As time goes on, however, the author John Krakauer begins to doubt this hypothesis. Some 4 years after Mccandless's death, the author Krakauer finally discovers that a toxic mold can grow on legumes. I had an epiphany, he writes. It wasn't the seeds of the wild potato that had done Mccandless in. He was probably killed instead by mold that had been growing on those seeds. Krakauer describes the effects of poisoning by the mold. The body is prevented from turning what it eats into a source of usable energy. If you ingest too much, you are bound to starve, no matter how much food you put into your stomach. Last summary part, chapter 18, the end of the book. On August 5th, Mccandless notes in his journal that he spent 100 days in the wild. Then he writes, but in weakest condition of death, looms as a serious threat. Again, the author points out Mccandless's folly in not having a topographical map. Only 6 miles south of the bus was a Park Service cabin, equipped with first aid supplies, bedding, and emergency food. 6 miles? A 3-hour walk away. He's a cross-country runner. Come on, Chris. Krakauer, however, notes that even the existence of this cabin would not have saved Mccandless, since the cabin had been recently vandalized and anything edible within had been exposed to wild animals in the weather. So there could have been maybe mold or food or raccoons eating it. Mccandless writes his final journal entry on August 12th. Barely a week later, he writes on the back of one of his books, I've had a happy life and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all. Look how skinny he is in that final picture. He tied multiple loops in that belt because his waistline is so skinny. What went wrong? As Chris Mccandless wrote, happiness is only real when shared. You see it in chapter 18 of the book. Are human relationships equal to worldly possessions? What's more important? Is a life with no material possessions really the best way to live? That's the final writing of Chris Mccandless. SOS, attention possible visitors. I need your help. I'm injured, near death, too weak to hike out of here. I'm all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. I am out collecting berries close by and shall return this evening. Thank you. He didn't sign his name Alexander Supertramp. His final writing, Chris Mccandless, August, question mark?